The coldest room in our building is never truly quiet. Even at 2:37 in the morning, it has a sound. The low hum of the refrigeration units, the tick of the wall clock over the door, and that faint, uneven metallic tapping from the stainless steel drain tray every time the compressor kicks on. That tapping is how I know I'm on nights. It's like a second hand that only I hear. My name's Marcus. I've been an embalmer in Ohio for more than a decade. Most nights follow the same pattern. I clock in, grab coffee that tastes like burned plastic, and walk straight down the hallway to the prep room. The room is all white tile and stainless steel. Overhead, the fluorescent lights buzz just enough to get into your nerves. We keep the room around 38 to 40 degrees, cold enough that the air stings your nose when you first walk in. My tools sit exactly where I left them on the tray. Scalpels in a neat row, forceps, aneurysm hooks, arterial tube sets, drainage forceps, suture needle pre-threaded so I don't have to fumble later. I check the cooler log first. Name, case number, time of death time placed in refrigeration. Toe tags have to match the paperwork. It's not just policy. You only need to see one mix-up early in your career to become obsessive about that. That night, the first thing that bothered me was not the body. It was the handwriting. Middle-aged male, found unresponsive at home, pronounced in the ER. On paper, it was a routine case. Cardiac history, meds list, nothing that screams story. But the time of death and the time he was checked into our cooler didn't quite line up. There was a gap that shouldn't have been there. Not huge, just enough to feel like somebody rushed the forms. I stood there a second longer than usual with the clipboard in my hand. Then I told myself what I always tell myself. Clerical error. People in hospitals work exhausted. It happens. I should have stopped there. I opened the cooler door and slid his gurney out. The cold air rolled across my arms, even through the sleeves of my jacket. He was on a standard mortuary cot covered with a white sheet. Toe tag on the right foot. Name matched. Number matched. His skin temperature felt about right when I checked. Cool to the touch, not rock hard. Rigor mortis usually peaks around 12 hours and then starts to release. By the time they get to me, I can usually predict what I'll feel before I even uncover them. I wheeled him into the center of the room, under the main light. The tapping from the drain tray clicked twice, then went quiet. The clock over the door ticked like it was trying to catch up. Feature setting comes before any fluid. Families never see the incisions. They do see the face. I folded the sheet down, exposed his head and shoulders, and took a breath. He looked like any man you'd see in a grocery store line, a little soft around the middle, gray at the temples, mouth slack from the way they'd intubated him. I started with the jaw, mouth former and place mandibular suture next. You get used to how much resistance you'll meet when you close a jaw. There's a certain give when tissues are truly relaxed. His didn't have it. When I brought the mandible up, it pushed back more than I expected. Not a movement, just a level of resistance that made me adjust my grip. Like Rigor was still hanging on in the wrong places. I noted it in my head. Rigor pattern slightly off. It happens, but it's not my favorite thing to feel alone at 2 in the morning. I got the jaw closed and secured, then moved to the eyes. Eye caps, a bit of cream lids brought down. When my thumb pressed gently over the right lid, I felt it. The smallest twitch. Not a jump, not a full flinch. Just a tiny quick movement under the pad of my glove. For a second, my hand stayed there. I waited for it to happen again. It didn't. I told myself out loud what I tell families when they ask if bodies can move. Nerves can discharge after death. Muscles can react to shifting gases. It's normal enough. My voice sounded a little too loud in the cold room. The tapping from the drain tray chimed once, and then fell back into that irregular rhythm. I positioned his hands over his abdomen, interlaced the fingers in the way that photographs well. His nails were short and clean. There was a faint line on his ring finger where a band must have been. As I brought his right arm across his chest, his index finger jerked. It was fast. A tight flex like a rubber band snapped and let go. The rest of the hand stayed still. Just that one finger. I froze. My brain went straight into checklist mode. Postmortem spasm. Yes, it can happen. Fresh enough case. Cardiac. Possible. I adjusted my stance and watched his hand for a full 10 seconds. Nothing moved. The skin stayed waxy still. The overhead light buzzed. Somewhere behind me, the compressor kicked on, and the drain tray tapped 3 times in a row, perfectly spaced. Gas, I said quietly. Just gas and nerves. My jaw clenched when I said it. I noticed that. I finished positioning the arms and secured them with a small strap under the sheet. The point is to keep the illusion of rest, even if what goes into making that illusion isn't restful at all. I stepped back and took in the whole picture. Head aligned, shoulders square, hands centered. No sign of liver staining on the face anymore. Gravity had already done its work before leaving that faint marbling along his back that no one would see. On the tray, I laid out what I'd need for arterial embalming. Arterial fluid concentrate. Measuring cup. Water from the prep sink about 2 gallons for standard mix. I keep the index around 2% higher if there's edema. The smell of formaldehyde climbed into the air as I opened the bottle. If you've never caught that in the back of your nose at 3 a.m, consider yourself lucky. It sticks. I filled the tank, checked my pressure setting on the pump. Between 10 and 15 psi is a good starting point. Rate of flow low at first. You learn to listen to the machine the way you listen to a person breathing. I should have been thinking only about ratios and vessels. Instead, my mind kept circling back to that finger. I glanced at the chart again, looking for anything I might have missed. Time of death. Pronouncing physician. Notes about resuscitation attempts. There was a line about prolonged downtime, unknown. I hesitated there. Unknown is a word you don't love seeing in this line of work. The clock ticked over another minute. The tap from the drain tray came late this time, just once, like it had skipped a beat and was trying to catch up. Stop overthinking, I told myself. I set the clipboard down a little harder than I meant to. That was my frustration moment. I raised the head of the gurney just a touch the way I always do before I start. It helps the features set naturally. I locked the wheels and rolled him closer to the sink so the drainage would fall straight into the basin. Metal on tile makes a very specific sound. You get used to it. You know how it should feel through your hands. When I pushed the gurney, it moved like normal. When I stopped, it didn't. There was a delayed muted scrape, like something heavy inside shifted a half-inch after the wheels were already locked. Just a small adjustment, almost nothing. I felt it through the frame in my palms. A tiny extra pull to the left. Like a bit of weight decided to settle where it wanted to be, not where I'd put it. I turned back to look. Visually, everything was exactly where I'd left it. Head centered under the light, hands folded, sheet smooth. I stood there longer than I would ever admit to anyone at work. Long enough that the clock ticked 4 times. Long enough that the drain tray gave one soft tap, then went quiet again. It's the wheels settling, I said. I said it out loud just to have a sound in the room. But when I finally stepped back to the tank to check my pressure, one more time, I realized something I didn't want to admit. Out of the dozen cases I had seen that month, this one had my full attention in a way the others didn't. And I was watching him now, the way you watch someone who might still somehow surprise you. Out of all the cases that month, this was the one I was watching the closest. I kept telling myself it was still just another body. I wheeled the tank a little closer and checked the settings again. Pressure at 12 psi, rate of flow set low. Mixture ready in the reservoir, a standard index for a man his size. The drain tray gave its faint metallic tap as the compressor kicked on. That sound was still there, just under everything. I opened the stopcock and started arterial embalming. Cannula into the right carotid, drainage through the right jugular with the forceps in place. I called out the numbers in my head like I always do. Pressure 12, flow low, return open. This is the part where a body usually behaves. You see the vascular system do what it can one last time. Tissues firm up. Color evens out. At first it did. His neck filled the way I expected. The skin along his face looked less collapsed. There was nothing strange in the readings. Then I noticed his right hand. I had left both hands folded over his abdomen under the sheet. Fingers interlaced, the way you see in casket photos. They had stayed put while I set the lines. As the pump kept running, I saw the outline of that right hand begin to change. It was slow. So slow that if I hadn't been staring straight at him, I might have missed it. The fingers were straight at first. Then the outline under the sheet tightened. The knuckles lifted just a little. The hand started to curl inward like he was trying to hold on to something. I lifted the edge of the sheet to see clearly. His thumb and first two fingers were now flexed around the fabric. They were gripping the sheet. Not jerking, not twitching. This was a gradual curl. I could feel the back of my neck get hot, even in the cold room. I told the camera in my head what I would tell anyone asking. Gravity can pull. Fluid can shift. Tissue turgor can change the way a hand sits. All of that is technically true. You can see fingers move as vessels fill. You can see a hand sink as tissues relax. But this looked like someone had decided to hold on. I should have stopped there. I checked the pump gauge. It was still hovering around 12 psi. Flow looked steady. The tank wasn't emptying too fast. Then the needle on the gauge jumped. It climbed to 16, dropped to 10, climbed again. Not in a random wobble either. It rose, held for a second, then dropped. Like it was meeting resistance that pushed back in short bursts. My jaw clenched so tight, I heard a little click in my own ear. I closed the stopcock halfway and watched the gauge. It steadied for a moment at about 11. The drainage tube from the jugular answered instead. Instead of a smooth, constant flow, the blood and fluid started coming in short bursts. On, pause, on, pause. Each burst matched the faint tapping from the drain tray. Tap, flow, tap, flow. I stared at the tube, then at the tray, then back at the tube. On a mechanical pump, that rhythm shouldn't happen. You set a pressure, you set a flow, you get a smooth curve, not a beat. I took one slow breath. It hitched halfway in without my permission. Lines are kinked, I muttered. That was the easiest answer. I followed the tubing from the tank to the cannula with my gloved hand. No kinks, no obvious block, no clamp half closed. The drain tray tapped again, short, sharp. I moved to the head of the table to check distribution. His face color looked acceptable. No signs of swelling. Neck tissues firming up. Nothing there screamed problem. But when I looked down at his right hand again, the grip was tighter. The tendons along the back of the hand were standing out now. It had the look of a hand bracing against something. That's not how gravity moves a hand, I said. I shut off the pump. The room snapped back to a quieter kind of noise. Just the cooler hum. Just the ticking wall clock. And that damn tray. Tap. I loosened the hose fitting near the cannula to vent any trapped air. As soon as I twisted it, the cannula popped free. It didn't just slip, it jumped. The arterial tube snapped out of the carotid with a force that did not match the current pressure setting. A thin arc of fluid and diluted blood sprayed across the tray and spotted my apron. I said one word I won't repeat here. That was my frustration moment. Then something else happened. The forceps I had left resting on his abdomen slid. They moved down over the slight slope of his gown and dropped straight off the right side of the body. They didn't bounce on the sheet first. They traveled like they were pushed. They landed perfectly in the stainless steel sink beside the table with a sharp, clean clang. I didn't move. He shouldn't have been able to do that. I looked back at his hand. It was now gripping the sheet so hard that the knuckles were blanched. The rest of his arm was still. No tremor, no visible shaking. The drain tray tapping sped up. Closer beats now. Not loud, but insistent. I felt a pressure behind my eyes like the start of a headache. I swallowed it down. The prep room door opened behind me with a quick hiss. I admit I jumped. Our junior attendant Tyler stepped in. He was 20-something, still new enough to crack jokes around the cooler. He went straight to the cabinet over the far counter, not even looking at the table at first. "Need more cavity fluid," he said. "Hang on," I told him. "Look at this." He glanced over, one hand still on the cabinet handle. I lifted the sheet just enough to show the curled hand and the way the pump gauge was still wobbling, even though the pump was off now. "Does that look right to you?" I asked. He stepped closer, squinted for a second, then shrugged. "Rig's old," he said. "Gauge sticks. Lines backflow sometimes. Just bump the pressure." His eyes barely stayed on the hand. He was already thinking about the rest of his list. "You don't see anything weird there?" I asked. He tilted his head, then shook it. "Man, I've seen arms sit up on me. You know that. Gas and nerves. You're overthinking it." He grabbed his bottles, nudged the door open with his hip, and was gone. The door sighed shut. The latch clicked. The room took him back. The tapping from the tray kept going. Now it sounded a little too close to the rhythm you feel when you check a pulse. I was alone with the body again. For a few seconds, I just listened. Tick. Tap. If you've ever stood in a quiet room and realized you don't trust what you're hearing, you'll know the feeling. I turned the pump back on, but this time at a lower pressure. 8 psi flow reduced. If the problem was a line backing off, should have smoothed things out. The gauge still surged. Not as high. But the motion was there, like something inside the vascular system was taking turns with the machine. I moved to the foot of the table to check the legs. You look at the feet to see if fluid is actually making the run. I pulled the sheet back to mid-thigh. That's when I saw it. I always mark my table. Tiny bits of tape on the rail to line up the shoulders. It keeps every body centered under the light the same way. It sounds obsessive, but it matters. His shoulders were off the marks, not by much, maybe half an inch. But they were shifted toward my side of the table, the head too. It was turned just a few degrees more in my direction than I had left it. If he had been like that from the start, I would have noticed. I am not casual about alignment. I replayed the last 10 minutes in my head. I had not grabbed the head. I had not adjusted the shoulders. I had only touched the lines and the hand. There was no way for the body to have drifted that far without a noticeable jolt. And I had felt no jolt. I felt my stomach drop just a little. "Okay," I whispered. "That's not nothing." It was the first time that night I admitted that out loud. The liver along his calves looked like it had been there for hours. Gravity had already done its postmortem job. That meant he had been dead long enough for the blood to settle, dead long enough for this kind of movement to feel wrong. I should have walked out and called the on-call doctor. Instead, I went back to the head of the table. One thing about working as an embalmer in Ohio is that you get used to winter deaths. Cold houses, cold garages, hypothermia cases that confuse time of death calls. It was in the back of my mind now. I needed to know if what I was seeing was anything close to that. I wiped my glove on a towel to get the excess fluid off. Then I set 2 fingers gently over the right side of his neck above the carotid area. It's something I do more out of habit than necessity. You're not supposed to feel anything. The skin was cooler than my glove. Under it, the tissues felt firm from the fluid. No give, no signs of anything active. Then it happened. For the briefest moment, something under my fingers pushed back. It wasn't a flutter. It wasn't a faint tremor. It was a single, strong contraction against the pads of my fingers, like a muscle pressing up from inside the neck. It lasted maybe half a second. Then it was gone. I pulled my hand back so fast I almost knocked the instrument tray. My heart pounded hard enough that I could hear it in my ears over the hum of the cooler. The pump was still on its same low mechanical setting. It could not have created that feeling. Not with that pressure. Not in that exact spot. I stared at the gauge. It was steady at 8 now, completely calm. The drain tray, which had been tapping in that weird rhythm all night, went silent. No hum change, no compressor noise, just silence where the tapping had been. It felt louder than the noise ever had. I left my hand hanging in the air for a long second, not quite willing to touch him again. Every explanation I had relied on up to that point suddenly felt thin. Reflex, gas, settling, equipment. None of them fit the feeling of a dead neck pushing back at me. And it was right there under my hand. It was still there under my hand, in my memory, when I forced myself to move again. The prep room lights showed every detail, and nothing on the table looked wrong to anyone but me. The cooler hummed in the wall, and somewhere underneath it all, I waited for that drain tray to tap again. I told myself I would finish fast. No more stopping. No more checking every strange feeling. Just finish the case document, nothing go home. I adjusted the pump back down and checked the tank level. There was enough arterial fluid left to finish distribution without topping off. Pressure was holding at 8 psi now, and if you only looked at the gauge, it looked fine. The machine made its steady mechanical whir with no rhythm, and for a moment the tray stayed quiet. I moved to his side and smoothed the sheet over his chest. The right hand was still curled and the sheet caught tight between his fingers. I told myself I needed those hands posed correctly before final checks, so I reached down and took his right wrist in my left hand. The clock on the wall ticked behind me, and I waited for it to sound normal. The skin under the glove felt firm from the fluid the way it should at this stage. I lifted his forearm and started to bring it back across his abdomen. Halfway through that motion, the arm pushed up against my hand. Not gravity, not a slide. I had to use real pressure to bring it back down. For a second, I just stared at the limb. His hand had rotated slightly so that the palm angled toward my wrist, the fingers' tightened tendons standing out along the back of the hand. I could feel the faint squeeze against my glove. That was not a passive movement. My breathing finally broke rhythm. I heard myself take a short, fast inhale I did not plan. I let go and stepped back until my hip touched the counter. The hum of the cooler filled the space where every explanation in my head had been. I should have stopped there. Visually, he was still a dead man on a stainless steel table. Toe tag on his foot. Rigor along his back and legs, consistent with ours in one position. Jaw secured, eyes closed, features set. None of that matched what I had just felt. Protocol says if there is any doubt, you stop. You call the pronouncing physician. You review the chart. In some states, you call the coroner. You document every step every time. What I actually did was reach for a pen light. I opened his right eyelid with my thumb and shined the light in. The cornea was dull, not as glassy as it had been hours ago. The pupil stayed fixed, no constriction at all. The clock ticked through 4 seconds that felt longer than that. I moved the light to the other eye. Same thing. No change. No reaction to the beam. The cooler hummed and I waited for one tap on the tray that did not come. Check temperature, I told myself. I took the digital probe we keep for body checks and placed it in the axillary area under his arm. The metal against his skin felt colder than my gloved hand. The display climbed slowly until it settled at 91 degrees Fahrenheit. That was high for how long he had supposedly been dead and refrigerated, but not impossible for a house found in Ohio in winter with unclear downtime. The reading did not tell me he was alive. It also did not tell me he was comfortably dead. I listened next. I grabbed the stethoscope from the hook and set the diaphragm to his chest. Upper right, upper left, lower quadrants. All I heard was the compressor in the wall and my own breath in the tubing. I moved it once to his neck over the area that had pushed back before. Nothing. No sound. No rush. No faint vibration. The room stayed steady except for the quiet tick of the clock and the faint electric buzz over my head. I pressed the chest piece a little harder than I needed to when I shifted. That was the one moment my frustration slipped. If this were my father, I remember thinking I would not forgive someone for keeping going. That thought sat heavy enough that I took my hand away from the stethoscope. I laid it on the tray with the bell turned down so I would not see it. The prep room felt smaller, even though nothing had changed. Something was already wrong. At this point, I had a choice. Shut it all down, call the doctors sound crazy, lose time, possibly lose trust, or keep going because every line on the paperwork said he was gone and every person before me had signed off. You want to know the truth? I stayed with the paperwork. I told myself I was dealing with late Rigor release gas shifts, mild hypothermia, confusing my expectations. I told myself the system would have caught a real mistake before the body got to me. I told myself I was tired and listening too hard. I'm finishing this, I said out loud. My voice sounded flat in the tile room. The drain tray gave one soft metallic tap in answer. I checked the tank again and closed the arterial system. I removed the cannula and tied off the vessel with a clean ligature. No sudden spurts, no gush. Just a slow ooze, and then nothing. I sutured the carotid incision with small even stitches, 1/2 inch apart. Pull tie cut, the kind of muscle memory you could do in your sleep. The sound of the thread sliding through tissue was soft under the constant hum. The room temperature on the wall thermostat still read 38 degrees. My arms did not agree. The air felt colder on my skin now. The hairs on my forearms were standing under my sleeves. It felt like the air was heavier without any change in the number. As I moved around the table, the fluorescent lights over me flickered once. Not a full blackout. Just a sharp drop and return that made every shadow jump for a split second. In that split second, all the background noise faded and silence pressed in. Then the light steadied and the hum snapped back. Every metal surface rail's tray sink had a faint vibration I could almost hear more than feel. It sounded like a thin, low ringing that never quite turned into a clear tone. I focused on closing. Close the neck, close the jugular puncture, clean the face, dry the skin, massage out any fluid if it pooled. Then I moved to the abdomen. I checked for any distension. Nothing obvious. The cavity fluid would come after this. But first I needed the main incisions closed and the body in its final position. I began suturing the neck skin starting at the lowest point. My hands moved on their own. I had done this hundreds of times. Halfway through, the tapping came back. It was not the slow occasional tap from earlier. It was faster now. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. It did not match the compressor cycle. It did not match the clock. It sounded like someone under the steel was trying different ways to be heard. I kept my eyes on the incision. If I looked at his face while that sound went on, I knew what would happen in my head. Almost done, I said. I was not sure if I was talking to him or to myself. When I tied the last knot and cut the thread, I finally made myself look. His lips were not in the same position. I had closed his mouth earlier, secured the jaw, set it in a neutral, calm expression. Now the lips were parted just enough to see the dark line where they met. The corners were drawn back a fraction more. It did not look like a random slackening. It looked to my eye in that moment like the start of forming a shape. Not open wide, not gasping. Just enough that it suggested a consonant. I did not hear anything. No air. No sound. Just that tapping under the tray and the hum in the walls. I felt my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. I could not swallow right for a second. That did not move, I told myself. It just settled. But I knew how I had left it. You get used to your own work. You know when it has changed. I should have walked out then and asked someone else to step in. Instead, I finished. I wiped his face, applied the basic cosmetic layer we use for viewing cases. Foundation to even the color. A little tone to take out the gray. I adjusted the pillow behind his head so that the neckline looked natural. The last step before moving him to a dressing table was to check his hands one more time. Families notice hands. They hold them. They stare at them for long minutes. His right hand was still curled, but not as tight. I worked the fingers gently until they loosened enough to rest in a more natural pose. The skin felt firm and rubbery from the fluid. In the center of his palm, my glove picked up a faint smear of moisture that should not have been there. It was not arterial fluid. The color was wrong. Too clear. I looked for a leak from a line or a cut. There was no source. The tapping on the tray stopped again at the exact moment I noticed the shine on my glove. I pressed the call button for the lift out of habit, then cleared it with my elbow. I was not bringing anyone back into that room now. I moved him to the holding rack myself once I was sure all external work was done. Dressing and casketing could wait until the next day. Someone else could handle that part. When I turned the lights down and closed the prep room door, my hands were still shaking. In over a decade, that had never happened to me. Not with trauma cases, not with children, not with decomps. Within a few months after that night, I put in a request to move off the night shift. Within a year, I moved into more administrative work. I told everyone it was because of my family schedule, which was partly true. The part I did not say was that I no longer trusted the line we draw between the living and the dead. Sleep never really went back to normal. I get 2 hours here, 3 hours there. Every time I close my eyes, I feel that arm pushing back against my hand and that single contraction in the neck that no machine could explain. I kept thinking about that chart too. So one afternoon when no one was around, I went into the office and pulled his file. Hospital records, EMS run sheet, pronouncement notes. There was an addendum at the bottom from the ER physician. Downtime prior to arrival uncertain. Possible hypothermia, complicating time of death estimation. That one sentence gave me just enough to call it a medical anomaly, if anyone ever asked. It did not give me enough to feel safe about what I had felt. I never reported any of those sensations. I never wrote them in the case log. On paper, it is one of the most routine embalming reports I have ever filed. And no one has ever questioned it. To this day, whenever I walk past that prep table, I still leave just enough space for that arm to move. If you made it this far, you've heard every detail I never meant to say out loud. If you want more cases like this, subscribe. I tell them exactly as they happened. Like the video if you felt that moment when the line between dead and not dead enough blurred. Share it if you know someone who works in these rooms. And comment below, do you think it was reflex or something we still can't explain?